The conference room on the 42nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Robert Caldwell stood at the head of the mahogany table, pointing at graphs projected on the screen behind him. He was 58 years old, though most people said he looked younger. His dark suits were tailored, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, and his presence commanded attention whenever he walked into a room. "Our third quarter earnings exceeded projections by 18%, he said, his voice steady and confident. The board members nodded approvingly. Robert had built Caldwell Technologies from a small startup in his garage to a multinational corporation worth billions. He was known for his sharp mind, his relentless work ethic, and his ability to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. But something felt wrong that morning. Robert paused mid-sentence, his hand moving to his temple. The room suddenly felt too bright, too hot. The faces around the table began to blur together like watercolors in the rain. "Robert?" His chief financial officer, David, stood up from his chair. "Are you all right?" Robert tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. His left arm went numb. The papers in his right hand slipped through his fingers and scattered across the polished floor. Then his legs buckled beneath him, and the last thing he saw before everything went black was the ornate chandelier above, spinning like a carousel. The emergency response was quick. Within minutes, paramedics rushed into the building. Within an hour, Robert was in the ICU at Mount Sinai Hospital, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, keeping track of every breath, every heartbeat. His wife, Catherine, arrived in a taxi, still wearing her yoga clothes from her morning class. Their son, Daniel, flew in from Boston, where he worked as an investment banker. Their daughter, Lisa, drove up from Philadelphia, calling every few minutes for updates. The neurologist, Dr. Patricia Morrison, was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and a gentle but honest manner. She met with the family in a private consultation room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and recycled air. "Your husband suffered a massive stroke," she explained to Catherine, who sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We've done everything we can to stabilize him, but the damage was severe. He's slipped into a coma. When will he wake up?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Morrison hesitated. She'd had this conversation hundreds of times, but it never got easier. "I wish I could give you a definite answer. The human brain is incredibly complex. Some patients wake up within days or weeks, others—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Others don't wake up at all. Right now, all we can do is wait and provide the best care possible." The days blurred into weeks. Catherine kept a vigil at Robert's bedside, reading aloud from the business journals he used to devour at breakfast. Daniel flew back and forth from Boston, managing his father's company affairs while trying to process the reality that the man who seemed invincible was lying motionless in a hospital bed. Lisa came every weekend, bringing fresh flowers and playing classical music on a small speaker, remembering how her father used to listen to Mozart while working in his study. But Robert remained still. His chest rose and fell with the help of machines. His eyes stayed closed. The doctors ran tests, adjusted medications, consulted with specialists from around the country. Nothing changed. The media caught wind of the story, of course. Robert Caldwell was too prominent to fly under the radar. "Tech billionaire in coma," the headlines read. "Caldwell Technologies stock plummets after CEO's collapse." Reporters camped outside the hospital. The family issued brief statements through their lawyer, asking for privacy during this difficult time. As months turned into a year, the visits became less frequent. Catherine still came every day, but she'd stopped reading the journals. Instead, she'd sit quietly, sometimes dozing in the chair beside his bed, sometimes just staring out the window at the city below. Daniel's visits dropped to once a month. The company needed leadership, and the board had appointed an interim CEO. Lisa came less often, too. It was too painful, too hard to see her vibrant father reduced to this silent figure who gave no sign of recognition, no hint that he knew they were there. Meanwhile, across the city in the South Bronx, life moved at a different pace. 12-year-old Nia Thompson walked home from school each afternoon, past the corner store where Mrs. Rodriguez always waved from behind the counter, past the community garden where Mr. Jenkins grew tomatoes in the summer, past the basketball court where her older brother used to play before he left for college. Nia lived with her grandmother, Beverly, in a third-floor apartment with creaky floors and radiators that clanged in the winter. Her mother had passed away from cancer when Nia was 7, and her father worked as a long-haul truck driver, gone for weeks at a time. But Beverly made sure Nia never felt alone. The apartment always smelled like something good cooking: collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie on Sundays. Nia was small for her age. With bright, curious eyes and hair she wore in neat braids that Beverly redid every 2 weeks. She was an excellent student, always finishing her homework before dinner, always raising her hand in class. Her teachers said she had a gift for reading. She could lose herself in a book and emerge hours later, blinking as if waking from a dream. When her school announced a community service program, Nia was one of the first to sign up. Students would volunteer at various places around the city: soup kitchens, libraries, senior centers, hospitals. Nia requested the hospital. She wasn't sure why exactly. Maybe because of her mother. Maybe because she felt comfortable in quiet spaces where people needed kindness. She was assigned to Mount Sinai's long-term care facility. Every Saturday morning, Beverly would ride the subway with her, and Nia would spend 3 hours visiting patients who didn't get many visitors. She'd bring books from the library and read to them, old folks mostly, who'd light up when she walked into their rooms. Some couldn't respond. Some were confused, forgetting her name minutes after she introduced herself, but Nia didn't mind. She learned that showing up mattered, even when there was nothing to say. After 2 years in the coma, Robert was moved from intensive care to the long-term facility. His condition had stabilized. He wasn't getting worse, but he wasn't getting better either. His room was private, spacious, paid for by his estate. Fresh flowers sat on the windowsill, though no one remembered who kept replacing them. The machines were quieter now. His body had learned to breathe on its own again. But his mind remained locked away, unreachable, trapped in a silence no one could penetrate. The nursing staff changed his position regularly to prevent bed sores. They bathed him, fed him through a tube, monitored his vital signs. To them, he was just another long-term patient, though they knew from the nameplates and occasional high-profile visitors that he'd once been someone important. Now he was simply Robert, the man in room 412 who never woke up. Outside, the world kept spinning. Seasons changed. The company he'd built continued without him. His family learned to live around the hole his absence had created. And in the Bronx, a young girl finished 7th grade and started 8th, still volunteering every Saturday, still reading to strangers, still believing that small acts of kindness could make a difference. Neither of them knew it yet. But their lives were about to intersect in a way that would change everything. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest moments. A girl walking down a hospital corridor, a name on a volunteer assignment sheet, a door opening to a quiet room where someone has been waiting in darkness for a very long time. The volunteer coordinator at Mount Sinai was a woman named Gloria who wore bright scarves and had a smile that made everyone feel welcome. She'd been working at the hospital for 20 years and had seen hundreds of young volunteers come and go. Most lasted a few months before the reality of hospital work. The sadness, the silence, the slow pace drove them away. But Nia was different. She'd been coming every Saturday for over a year now, never missing a week unless she was sick. "I've got a new assignment for you," Gloria said one Saturday morning, handing Nia a clipboard. "Room 412, long-term patient, been here about 2 years now. Family doesn't visit much anymore. I think he could use some company." Nia looked at the name on the sheet. Robert Caldwell. Room 412. She'd walked past that room dozens of times but had never been inside. It was at the end of the hall, away from the other rooms, quieter somehow. "What should I know about him?" Nia asked. Gloria's expression softened. "He's in a coma, sweetie. Has been for a long time. The nurses say he's stable, but he doesn't respond to anything. Some people might think it's pointless to sit with someone who can't respond, but I don't believe that. I think on some level people know when they're not alone." Nia nodded. She'd read to patients with dementia who didn't seem to recognize her, to elderly folks who fell asleep within minutes of her arrival. She understood that presence mattered even without words. That afternoon, she pushed open the door to room 412 for the first time. The room was larger than the others she'd visited, with a window that looked out over the East River. Sunlight streamed across the floor in golden rectangles. The man in the bed looked peaceful, almost like he was sleeping normally except for the feeding tube and the monitors quietly tracking his vitals. Nia pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, placing her library book on her lap. "Hi, Mr. Caldwell," she said softly. "My name is Nia. I'm going to read to you today if that's okay." No response, of course. Just the quiet beep of the heart monitor, the gentle hiss of the air conditioning. She opened her book, an adventure novel about a boy searching for hidden treasure, and began to read. Her voice was clear and steady, rising and falling with the rhythm of the story. She read for 30 minutes, then paused to tell him about her week at school, about the math test she'd aced, about her grandmother's attempt to teach her how to make peach cobbler that had ended with flour all over the kitchen. As she talked, something caught her eye. One of the monitors showed a slight uptick, then settled back to its normal rhythm. Nia noticed but didn't think much of it. Machines did strange things sometimes. Over the next few weeks, visiting Robert became part of her routine. She'd arrive at the hospital, wave to the nurses at the station, and head straight to room 412. She brought different books, mysteries, science fiction, poetry, whatever she'd checked out from the library that week. She told him about current events, about the changing seasons, about the small details of ordinary life. The nurses began to notice something odd. Clara, who'd been working the day shift for 15 years, mentioned it first during a staff meeting. "Has anyone else noticed the pattern with the patient in 412? She asked, flipping through her charts. "Every Saturday afternoon, his vitals show increased activity. Heart rate goes up slightly. Brain activity shows small fluctuations, but only on Saturdays, only between 1 and 4. Another nurse, Jerome, nodded. "I've seen it too. I thought maybe it was related to medication timing, but the schedule hasn't changed." "It's the girl," Clara said, "the volunteer who reads to him. I've been monitoring him during her visits. Something about her presence affects him." The head nurse decided to document it more carefully. They adjusted the monitoring equipment, made detailed notes, tracked every variable they could think of. And the pattern held. When Nia was in the room, Robert's body responded in subtle but measurable ways. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the neurologist who'd been following Robert's case since his admission, was called in to review the data. She sat in her office late one evening, studying the charts, comparing the Saturday readings to every other day of the week. The differences were small but consistent. She'd seen cases of coma patients responding to family members' voices, to familiar music, to specific stimuli, but this was different. This was a stranger, a child, somehow reaching through the fog of unconsciousness. She arranged to observe one of Nia's visits. The following Saturday, Dr. Morrison stood quietly in the corner of room 412, clipboard in hand, watching as Nia settled into her usual chair. "Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell," Nia said cheerfully. "I hope you had a good week. I brought a new book today. It's about space exploration. I thought you might like it since, you built a technology company. Gloria told me that. Pretty cool." As Nia began to read, Dr. Morrison watched the monitors. Within 5 minutes, Robert's heart rate increased from 62 to 68 beats per minute. Not dramatic, but definite. His blood pressure ticked up slightly. The EEG showed minor changes in brainwave patterns. When Nia paused her reading to tell a story about her science class, something remarkable happened. Robert's right index finger twitched. Just once, barely visible, but Dr. Morrison saw it. She stepped closer, her pulse quickening. Could it be a coincidence? A muscle spasm? But then it happened again when Nia laughed at something in her story. A small twitch, as if his body was trying to respond to the sound of her laughter. After the visit ended and Nia left, Dr. Morrison pulled up a chair and sat where the girl had been sitting. She spoke to Robert in a calm, professional voice, asking him to respond if he could hear her. Nothing. No change in the monitors, no movement. She tried reading from the same book Nia had been reading. Still nothing. It wasn't just any voice that reached him. It was her voice. Something about this particular girl broke through where nothing else could. Dr. Morrison contacted Catherine Caldwell that evening. The phone call was brief, clinical, but the message was clear. After 2 years of no progress, there were signs of response. Small signs, yes, but signs nonetheless, and they were connected to a young volunteer's visits. Catherine arrived at the hospital the next morning with Daniel and Lisa. Dr. Morrison explained the findings, showed them the charts, the documented patterns. Catherine's hands trembled as she looked at the data. You're telling me some random child is getting through to him when we couldn't? Daniel's voice was sharp, defensive. That doesn't make sense. I know it's difficult to understand, Dr. Morrison said gently. Consciousness is mysterious. We don't fully understand why certain stimuli work when others don't. But the data is clear. When this girl visits, your father's brain shows activity we haven't seen in 2 years. Lisa wiped her eyes. Can we meet her? Can we be here during one of her visits? It was arranged for the following Saturday. Beverly brought Nia to the hospital as usual, but Gloria stopped them before they reached room 412. There are some people who'd like to meet you. Sweetheart, Gloria said, leading them to a small conference room. Nia felt nervous as she walked in. 3 people sat around the table. An elegant woman with silver-streaked hair, a man in an expensive suit, and a younger woman with kind eyes. They all stood when she entered. Catherine stepped forward first. You must be Nia. I'm Catherine Caldwell, Robert's wife. This is our son Daniel and our daughter Lisa. Nia shook their hands politely, conscious of her simple clothes, her worn sneakers. These people looked like they lived in a different world. We understand you've been visiting my husband, Catherine continued, her voice catching slightly. The doctors say he responds to you. After all this time, you're reaching him somehow. Nia didn't know what to say. I just read to him. Talked to him. I didn't know it was helping. Would you mind if we observed one of your visits? Lisa asked gently. We'd stay quiet. We just want to see. 20 minutes later, they all stood in room 412. Nia felt self-conscious with the family watching, but she tried to act natural. She opened her book and began to read, her voice steady despite her nerves. Within minutes, the monitor shifted. Robert's heart rate increased. His eyelids fluttered, something Catherine gasped at because she'd never seen it before. When Nia told him about her grandmother's new recipe for banana pudding, his fingers moved. Lisa grabbed her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. Daniel stood frozen, staring at his father's hand as if seeing it for the first time. Catherine sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the reality that her husband was still in there somewhere, still fighting to come back. And in that moment, in that quiet hospital room with afternoon light slanting through the windows, everyone understood that something extraordinary was happening. A connection was forming that defied medical explanation, that crossed every boundary of age and background and circumstance. The question was no longer whether Robert could wake up. The question was what would happen when he did. After that Saturday, everything changed. Dr. Morrison put together a team of specialists, neurologists, physical therapists, speech pathologists, all focused on one goal: bringing Robert Caldwell back to consciousness. But at the center of their strategy was something no medical textbook could explain: a 13-year-old girl with a library book and a gentle voice. Nia started visiting 3 times a week instead of just Saturdays. Beverly would bring her after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, riding the subway together in comfortable silence. Nia did her homework in Robert's room sometimes, reading her assignments aloud, talking through her math problems as if he were helping her solve them. Okay, so if x equals 7, she'd say, tapping her pencil against her notebook. Then we multiply by 3, which gives us 21. Right, Mr. Caldwell? I think that's right. And sometimes, just sometimes, his hand would twitch as if to say, yes, keep going. The responses grew stronger over the weeks. His fingers moved more frequently. His eyelids fluttered when she spoke. Once, when she was reading a particularly funny scene from a book, the corner of his mouth seemed to lift slightly, almost like the ghost of a smile. Dr. Morrison documented everything. She brought in researchers from Columbia University who studied consciousness and coma recovery. They ran new tests, tried different approaches, but always with Nia present because that was when Robert showed the most activity. It's unprecedented, one researcher said during a team meeting. The stimuli that typically work, familiar voices, meaningful memories, strong emotional connections, those are absent here. They didn't know each other before the coma, yet somehow her presence is acting as a catalyst. Maybe that's exactly why it works, Dr. Morrison suggested. No history, no expectations, no grief. Just pure, uncomplicated human connection. Catherine Caldwell started coming to the hospital during Nia's visits. She'd sit quietly in the corner, watching this girl do what she and her children hadn't been able to do. reach her husband in that dark place where he'd been trapped for so long. At first, Catherine felt a complicated mix of emotions. Gratitude, yes, but also something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. Why this stranger and not his wife of 35 years? But as the weeks passed, Catherine's feelings softened. She watched how Nia treated Robert with simple dignity, never pitying him, never treating him like he was already gone. She talked to him like he was fully present, filling him in on world events, asking his opinion even though he couldn't answer, assuming he understood every word. One afternoon, Catherine worked up the courage to speak. "Thank you," she said quietly as Nia was packing up her books. "For everything you're doing." Nia looked up, surprised. "I'm just reading to him." "It's more than that." Catherine's voice wavered. "You're giving us hope. You're bringing him back to us." Lisa started visiting more often too, sometimes arriving before Nia left. She'd listen as the girl read, amazed at how animated she became when describing the stories, how she did different voices for different characters, how she made even the boring parts sound interesting. Lisa remembered her father doing the same thing when she was little, reading bedtime stories with enthusiasm and drama. One day, Lisa brought coffee for everyone, even a hot chocolate for Nia. They sat together in the small family waiting area, an unlikely trio: the billionaire's daughter in her designer clothes, the elderly woman who cleaned offices at night to make ends meet, and the girl who somehow held all their hopes in her small hands. "How did you get so good at reading aloud?" Lisa asked. Nia shrugged. "My mama used to read to me every night before she passed. She said stories were magic, that they could take you anywhere, make you feel anything. After she died, I started reading to my grandmother. Then I started volunteering here. I guess I just like sharing stories." Beverly squeezed her granddaughter's hand, her eyes shining with pride and grief. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Thursday in late October, 3 months after Nia had started her regular visits. The leaves outside were turning golden red, and the light coming through the window had that particular autumn quality, warm and soft. Nia was reading from a book called The Old Man and the Sea. She'd chosen it because Gloria mentioned that Robert used to sail when he was younger. She was reading the part where the old fisherman refuses to give up despite exhaustion and pain, fighting to bring in his great fish. "He's a man who never quits," Nia said, looking up from the book. "Kind of like you, Mr. Caldwell. You've been fighting for so long. Everybody's so proud of you." She went back to reading, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of Hemingway's prose. Then the fish came alive with his death in him and rose high out of the water. That's when it happened. Robert Caldwell opened his eyes. Not a flutter this time. Not a half-conscious moment. His eyes opened fully, blinking against the light, and turned toward the sound of her voice. Nia gasped, nearly dropping the book. "Mr. Caldwell." His mouth moved, working to form words that hadn't been spoken in 2 years. No sound came out at first, just the effort of trying. His eyes found her face and locked there, focused and aware. "I'll get the doctor." Nia jumped up, running to the door, her heart pounding. "Dr. Morrison, Nurse Clara, anyone." "He's awake!"
"He's awake."
The next hour was chaos. Medical staff rushed in and out. Dr. Morrison ran tests, shining lights in Robert's eyes, asking him questions, monitoring his responses. Catherine arrived within 20 minutes, having been called immediately. Daniel was on a plane from Boston. Lisa came running from a meeting downtown, still in her heels, mascara smeared from crying. Through it all, Robert's eyes kept searching the room until they found Nia again. She stood pressed against the wall, trying to stay out of the way, overwhelmed by the storm of activity she'd triggered. Dr. Morrison noticed. "Nia," she said gently, "come here for a moment." Nia approached the bed nervously. Robert's eyes followed her, and when she was close enough, he lifted his hand, slowly, shakily, reaching toward her. She took his hand carefully, afraid of hurting him. His grip was weak but deliberate. His mouth moved again, and this time a sound came out, rough and barely audible. "Thank you." Tears streamed down Nia's face. "You're welcome, Mr. Caldwell. Welcome back." Catherine stood on the other side of the bed, watching her husband hold this child's hand, seeing him struggle to stay conscious, to stay present. When his eyes finally moved to her face, the recognition there nearly broke her. "Robert," she whispered. He couldn't speak anymore. The effort had exhausted him. But he saw her, really saw her, and in his eyes she saw the man she'd married, the man she'd thought she'd lost forever. The medical team explained that this was just the beginning. Robert had opened his eyes, but his brain had been dormant for 2 years. He would need extensive therapy to relearn basic functions. Speech, movement, memory, everything would be a challenge. There was no guarantee how much he'd recover or how long it would take, but he was awake. He was fighting, and he'd come back to the sound of a young girl's voice reading about an old man who refused to quit. The news spread fast. By evening, reporters had gathered outside the hospital. Miracle awakening, the headlines read. Billionaire emerges from 2-year coma. They wanted interviews, photos, the inside story. Gloria and the hospital administration worked to protect Naya's privacy. She was a minor, a volunteer, and they weren't going to let her be turned into a media spectacle. Beverly was grateful. She'd seen what happened to people when they got caught up in publicity machines. They lost themselves. That night, as Beverly and Naya rode the subway home, they sat close together, not talking much. The train car rocked gently, lights flickering past in the tunnel darkness. You did something special today, Beverly finally said. I just read to him, Grandma. Like always. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes just showing up, just caring, just being present. That's the most powerful thing in the world. Naya rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder, suddenly exhausted. She thought about Robert's eyes opening, about the way he'd looked at her with such gratitude, about the weight of his hand in hers. She didn't know yet how her life was about to change, how the simple act of reading to a stranger would ripple outward, affecting not just Robert and his family, but hundreds of other people, other families, other stories. All she knew was that she'd witnessed something miraculous, something that made her believe even more strongly in what her mother had taught her, that stories were magic, that kindness mattered, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room could make the biggest difference. Robert's awakening was just the first step of a journey that would test everyone's patience and strength. The man who'd commanded boardrooms and built a technology empire now struggled to lift a spoon to his mouth. The brain that had strategized billion-dollar deals couldn't remember what day it was or what he'd eaten for breakfast. The physical therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, worked with him every morning. She'd help him sit up in bed, then eventually stand with assistance, then take a few shaky steps holding onto parallel bars. Robert's legs had forgotten how to support his weight. His muscles had atrophied during 2 years of lying still. Every movement was a battle. Come on, Robert, Karen would encourage. 3 more steps. You can do it. He'd grit his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of simply walking across a room. Sometimes frustration would overwhelm him and he'd have to stop, breathing hard, fighting back tears of anger at his own weakness. But Nia still came to visit, now 4 times a week. The hospital had created a special arrangement, recognizing how crucial she was to his recovery. She'd sit with him during his therapy session, sometimes cheering him on like she was watching a championship game. That's it, Mr. Caldwell. You're doing amazing, she'd call out as he took trembling steps. And somehow, when she was there, he could always push a little harder, go a little further. The speech therapist, Vincent, helped Robert relearn how to form words clearly. His voice was rough at first, the words tangled up between his brain and his mouth. Simple sentences took enormous concentration. How are you? He'd practice, the words coming out slow and deliberate. I'm good, Nia would respond cheerfully. How are you feeling today? Tired, Robert would manage, and they'd both smile at the small victory of a complete answer. Memory was the hardest part. Robert could remember his childhood clearly, his college years starting his company. But the years leading up to the stroke were foggy. He recognized Catherine, knew she was his wife, but couldn't remember their last anniversary or what they'd argued about the week before his collapse. He knew Daniel and Lisa were his children, but the details of their adult lives, Daniel's recent divorce, Lisa's new position at a law firm, were lost to him. One afternoon, about 2 months into his recovery, Catherine sat beside his bed going through old photo albums, trying to help him piece his life back together. They came across a picture from a company retreat 5 years ago. Robert stared at it, his brow furrowed. I don't remember this, he said quietly. Catherine's voice was patient, though her heart ached. It was in Colorado. You gave a speech about innovation. Everyone said it was inspiring. I don't remember, he repeated, and the frustration in his voice was clear. That's when Nia arrived for her afternoon visit. She saw the tension in the room and immediately understood that this was a difficult moment. You know what my grandma says? Nia offered, settling into her chair. She says our lives aren't just made up of what we remember. They're made up of what we do next. Maybe some memories are gone, but you're making new ones every day. Robert looked at this wise young girl and felt something loosen in his chest. She was right. He couldn't control what was lost, but he could control how he moved forward. As the weeks progressed, visitors came and went. Business colleagues visited, awkward and uncertain about what to say to a man who used to be their equal, but now struggled with basic tasks. Some stopped coming after the first visit, uncomfortable with the reality of his condition. Others came regularly, treating him with respect and normalcy, talking about current events and asking his opinion even when his answers were slow and simple. Daniel struggled the most with his father's recovery. He'd spent his whole life trying to live up to Robert Caldwell's expectations, trying to be as brilliant, as driven, as successful. Now his father couldn't remember half of Daniel's achievements, couldn't engage in the complex business discussions they used to have. It felt like losing him all over again. One day Daniel confided in Lisa over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. I don't know how to talk to him anymore. He's not the same person. Lisa stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we're getting a chance to know a different version of him.
Have you noticed how patient he is now?
How he actually listens instead of always thinking 3 steps ahead. The old dad never would have spent an hour listening to Nia talk about her science project, but yesterday that's exactly what he did. And he seemed genuinely interested. Daniel hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been so focused on what his father had lost that he hadn't noticed what might be emerging in its place. The media attention was relentless. Reporters wanted the miracle story, billionaire saved by mysterious young girl. They offered money for interviews, for exclusive rights to the story. A production company wanted to make a movie. Publishers wanted book deals. Beverly fielded these requests with firm politeness. My granddaughter is not for sale, she told them. She did a kind thing because that's who she is. We're not making a spectacle of it. The hospital had to increase security to keep photographers away. Gloria made sure Nia could enter and leave through a private entrance. The goal was to protect her childhood, to let her remain just a girl who volunteered at a hospital, not a celebrity or a symbol. But some good came from the attention. Donations poured into the hospital's long-term care program. Other families who had loved ones in comas reached out, asking about volunteer programs, wanting to know if what worked for Robert might work for their family members too. Dr. Morrison began researching the therapeutic effects of regular, compassionate contact with coma patients, potentially changing how hospitals approach long-term care. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself spending time with Beverly, these two women from completely different worlds united by gratitude for the girl who'd brought them together. They'd have coffee in the cafeteria, talking about their lives, their fears, their hopes. I don't know how to repay you, Catherine said one afternoon. What Nia did for Robert, for our family. Beverly held up her hand. Nia didn't do it for repayment. She did it because she has a good heart. You don't owe us anything, but I want to help. I know you work long hours. I know money is tight. Please, let me set up a fund for Nia's education, for your medical expenses. No, Beverly said firmly, then softened her tone. I appreciate it, I really do. But we're not a charity case. We manage, we get by. And taking money would change things, would make this about something other than what it is. Catherine respected that, even as it frustrated her. She was used to solving problems with resources, with money and influence. But this situation required something different. One evening, about 3 months into Robert's recovery, something beautiful happened. Robert was in his room with Nia, Catherine, and Lisa. Nia was reading a poem about autumn when Robert suddenly spoke up, unprompted. I was trapped, he said, his words clearer than they'd been in weeks, in the coma. I could hear things sometimes, but they were distant, like I was underwater. Then I heard her voice. He nodded toward Nia. It was like a rope I could hold on to. I followed it back. Everyone was quiet, absorbing this revelation. What was it like? Lisa asked softly. Being trapped like that? Robert thought for a long moment. Lonely, dark, but peaceful too in a way. No pressure, no decisions, no failures or successes, just nothing. And that was the problem. The nothing was easier than coming back. Until I had a reason to fight for something again. He looked at Nia with such profound gratitude that it made her eyes sting with tears. You gave me that reason. You talked to me like I mattered, like I was still a person. You didn't know who I was, didn't care about my money or my company. You just cared, and that cut through all the fog and the fear and the darkness. Catherine reached over and took her husband's hand. For the first time since his awakening, she felt like she was really talking to the man she'd married. Not just the shell of him. That night, as Nia and Beverly rode the subway home, Nia was quieter than usual. You okay, baby? Beverly asked. I keep thinking about what he said, about being trapped and lonely. Nobody should have to feel that way. Beverly pulled her close. And because of you, he doesn't anymore. You did that, not with money or fancy medicine, but with kindness and showing up. Don't ever forget how powerful that is. Outside the subway windows, the city lights blurred past, and Nia realized that her simple act of reading to a stranger had created ripples she was only beginning to understand. The real miracle wasn't just that Robert had woken up. It was what happened next. How lives could interweave in unexpected ways, how compassion could bridge any divide, and how sometimes saving someone else could change you just as much. 6 months after Robert opened his eyes, he was finally ready to leave the hospital. He could walk with a cane now, though his steps were still careful and measured. His speech had improved dramatically, and while some memories remained fuzzy, his mind was sharp enough to follow conversations, read the newspaper, and even offer opinions on his company's direction. Though he'd officially stepped down as CEO, the day he was discharged, a small group gathered in his room to say goodbye. The nursing staff had become like family. Clara, Jerome, even the night shift workers who'd monitored him during those long, dark months. Dr. Morrison was there too, her clinical detachment giving way to genuine emotion. You're a miracle, Robert, she said, shaking his hand. Not just because you woke up, but because of how far you've come. Robert smiled, that same warm smile that was coming more naturally now. I had good help. His eyes found Nia, who stood beside her grandmother wearing her school backpack because she'd come straight from class. Over the past months, she'd become woven into the fabric of the Caldwell family in ways that transcended explanation. She wasn't an employee or a charity case or a symbol. She was simply Nia, the girl who read stories, who brought light into dark places, who reminded everyone what really mattered. I'm going to miss our reading sessions, Robert said to her. Who says they have to stop? Nia grinned. I know where you live now. Well, kind of. I mean, I know you're going home. Maybe I could still visit sometimes. If that's okay? Catherine stepped forward, her hand resting gently on Nia's shoulder. You're welcome anytime. Truly. You're part of our family now. Beverly squeezed her granddaughter's hand, her eyes glistening. This journey had been overwhelming at times, scary at others, but it had also been beautiful. She'd watched her girl handle attention and pressure with grace, never losing sight of who she was or why she'd started volunteering in the first place. The transition home wasn't easy for Robert. His Manhattan penthouse felt foreign, too big, too quiet. He'd shuffle from room to room with his cane, trying to reconnect with a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The closet full of expensive suits seemed ridiculous now. The awards and plaques lining his office walls felt hollow. What had he been chasing all those years? What had been so important that he'd worked 70-hour weeks and missed his children growing up? Catherine noticed the change in him. The drive that had defined him for decades had softened into something gentler. He spent mornings on the terrace watching the city wake up, drinking coffee slowly instead of gulping it down while checking emails. He asked her about her day and actually listened to the answer. He wanted to know about her book club, her yoga classes, the small details of her life he'd always been too busy to care about. It's like getting to know you all over again, she told him one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. Paint the sky pink and gold, maybe that's not such a bad thing, Robert replied, taking her hand. Maybe we both needed a fresh start. Daniel visited every Sunday for dinner, a tradition they'd never had before. At first, the conversations were awkward. Both men dancing around the fact that their relationship had been built almost entirely on business. But slowly they found new ground. Daniel talked about his struggles with his divorce, his uncertainty about his career path. Robert listened without judgment, without trying to fix everything, without pushing his son to be someone he wasn't. "I spent so much time trying to be you," Daniel admitted one night over coffee. "I don't think I ever figured out how to be me." Robert nodded slowly. "I spent so much time trying to prove something that I forgot what I was trying to prove. Maybe we both get a second chance now." Lisa brought Nia to visit one Saturday afternoon. Robert's face lit up when he heard the elevator ding and saw them step into the penthouse. Nia's eyes went wide at the space, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the art on the walls, the view that stretched across the entire city. "Whoa," she breathed. "You can see everything from up here." "Come here," Robert said, leading her to the terrace. "I want to show you something." They stood at the railing, the city spreading out below them like a living map. Robert pointed toward the Bronx, the building smaller from this distance but no less important. "Your neighborhood is over there, and the hospital is there, and this is where I ended up. All these people, all these lives happening at the same time. I used to look at this view and see opportunities, investments, competition. Now I see people, families, stories. And I realize that for all the buildings with my name on them, for all the money in my accounts, the most valuable thing I have is the connection we make with each other." Nia looked up at him, this man who'd been a stranger just months ago and had become something like a grandfather to her. "That's really nice, Mr. Caldwell." "Call me Robert," he said. "I think we're past the formalities." What happened next surprised everyone, including Robert himself. He announced the creation of the Connection Project, a foundation dedicated to bringing volunteer readers into hospitals across the country. The goal was simple: ensure that no patient in long-term care had to face their recovery alone. The foundation would train volunteers, support hospital programs, and fund research into the therapeutic effects of human connection on coma patients and others with severe medical conditions. At the press conference announcing the initiative, Robert spoke from a prepared statement, but his words carried the weight of lived experience. "I was given a second chance at life because a young person decided that showing up mattered, that reading to a stranger was worth her time. She didn't do it for recognition or reward. She did it because she believed that everyone deserves dignity and compassion. This foundation will make sure her example spreads to every corner of this country." The media coverage this time was different. Instead of focusing on the miracle or the money, reporters told stories of other volunteers, other patients, other families affected by the power of simple human kindness. Hospitals reported increases in volunteer applications. Schools started programs sending students to read to elderly patients. The ripples that had started with one girl and one man in a quiet hospital room were spreading wider than anyone had imagined. But perhaps the most significant change happened in the small moments that never made the news. Robert started spending Tuesday afternoons at the community center in Nia's neighborhood, helping kids with their homework, sharing stories about his own journey. He didn't arrive in a limousine or wear expensive suits. He came on the subway with his cane, dressed casually, just another person trying to give back. Beverly sometimes joined him, and they'd work side by side, helping children sound out words, explaining math concepts, offering encouragement. Catherine came too, finding purpose in this work that all her charity galas had never quite provided. One year to the day after Robert woke up, the hospital held a small ceremony. They dedicated a reading room in the long-term care facility, a comfortable space with bookshelves, soft chairs, and windows overlooking a small garden. A plaque on the wall read, "The Nia Thompson Reading Room, where stories bring us home." Nia stood in front of that plaque, overwhelmed. She was 14 now, taller, more confident, but still the same girl who believed in the power of showing up. "I don't deserve this," she whispered to her grandmother. "Yes, you do," Beverly said firmly. "You changed the world, baby. Maybe not the whole world, but you changed Robert's world and his family's world, and now all those people the foundation will help. You changed their worlds too. That's what happens when you lead with love." Robert gave a short speech, his voice stronger now, full of warmth and gratitude. "This room represents a simple truth: we need each other. In our darkest moments, when we're lost and alone, sometimes all it takes is one person who cares enough to stay, to speak, to remind us that we're not forgotten. Nia did that for me. This room will help others do it for patients who come after me." As the ceremony ended and people mingled, eating cookies and drinking punch, Nia found herself standing by the window, looking out at the garden where spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. Robert came to stand beside her, leaning on his cane. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. For not giving up on me. For showing me what really matters. Naya smiled. You know what's funny? I learned just as much from you. About courage, about fighting for another chance. About how it's never too late to start over. They stood together in comfortable silence, this unlikely pair whose lives had intersected in the most unexpected way. Outside, the world kept turning. People rushed past on their way to somewhere important. But in that moment, in that quiet room dedicated to the power of human connection, everything felt perfectly still and absolutely right. Years later, when people asked Nia about her experience, she'd tell them it wasn't really about the miracle of Robert waking up. It was about the smaller miracle that happened every time someone chose compassion over indifference, connection over isolation, presence over absence. We all have the power to reach someone who's lost in the darkness, she'd say. Sometimes all it takes is showing up with a book and a caring heart. You'd be amazed what that can do. And she was right. The world changed. One story at a time, one connection at a time, one person choosing to see the humanity in another. That was the real miracle. That was what mattered most. That was the legacy of a billionaire who lost everything, and a young girl who helped him find what he'd been missing all along.